look like you're at the beach right now. It looks nice and bright and totally my kind of vibe. How are you today?
Great. I'm at the East Coast beach. I'm in Virginia, but it's a beautiful day. I mean, spring's finally here, so we're
Ah,
happy.
that's the best feeling. I know that feeling after living in New York for so many years, that long winter, and then when you start to get the warmth, it's like a whole new, it's just the best feeling ever. So, yeah.
Yeah, makes you
Yeah.
appreciate it. So
Totally. Well, listen, I'm so excited. I kind of, I just dosed you a little bit with this. So, I first discovered you on an incredible podcast with Tom Bilyeu, Impact Theory. And the whole interview is so excellent. There was one aspect that just hooked me, and I was like, holy shit. And I'm going to start there. And it was this optimal performance piece. So,
yeah,
optimal performance is built into my brand. Literally in the intro, you hear me talk about the content here on this podcast is meant to serve an individual to live their most beautiful and optimal performance in life. So hearing you talk about the difference between peak performance, because my brand is a holistic high performance lifestyle brand. So, we definitely want to hit these high moments of performance, but to hear you differentiate peak performance and optimal performance was so powerful for me. I would love for you, if you don't mind, just starting there, explaining that difference.
yeah, absolutely. It's something that occurred to me, especially as I got out and I was talking about high performing teams, and a lot of people would ask me about peak performance because peak performance is the thing now. I mean, everybody's trying to reach it and maintain it and do as much of it as possible. And ultimately, I want to tell everybody there's nothing wrong with peak performance. The what we have to recognize, however, is that peak is an apex.
Yeah.
And an apex you can only come down from, right? So peak off it also often has to be prepared for and planned for and scheduled, right? So the pro athlete, say the football player, for example, spends his entire week planning and prepping so that he may peak for 3 hours on Sunday, and it can be done in any sport. I mean, because that's the whole point of sports is to peak while you're playing. It can be done in business. It can be anywhere. I mean, you can plan to peak for a sales presentation you want to give or a presentation. The problem with focusing only on peak is it misses everything else, and that's what optimal performance is about. Optimal performance is about everything else, okay? Because optimal performance, and this is really where I kind of describe SEALs as and spec operators as, is that it's how can I do the very best that I can right now in the moment, whatever the best might look like. Sometimes it looks like peak, it's flow states and everything's clicking and it's cool. But sometimes it's like it's bad, it's gritty, it's dirty, it's hard, and all I have in my tank is I can just take one step at a time. And I thought about myself in SEAL training or certain combat situations where there was nothing peak about my performance. And then you think about people struggling with disease or cancer or struggling through hard times like a divorce or any hard thing they're doing, and there's nothing peak about there's like, no, I'm not at peak, I'm taking it day by day or moment by moment. This is us, by the way, in COVID, 2020, when COVID hit and we're suddenly in quarantine. Very few of us got up that morning, that first morning in quarantine, and would have described our performance as peak, right? um,
Right.
we, we were doing the best we could,
Yeah.
and so I think optimal performance allows a very responsible and healthy modulation that does a couple of things. It tells us when we can go at what level, right? I don't need to be peak while I'm driving to the grocery store, okay?
Mhm.
So I can modulate my performance so that I'm recovering in the moments I can recover, and then maximizing my peak when I have to peak, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're trying to peak all the time, when you actually have to peak, you're probably going to be worn out and not be able to peak the way you're supposed to. So it allows you to modulate and plan a little bit better. And then in the moments you need to peak on demand, and that's really the key.
Oh, it's so good. I love it because to me, it's like it's more sustainable. There's more longevity. I mean, my whole thing is I'm here to live from my fullest potential in life. That's what I'm here to coach my girls, my community. That's all the content in this podcast. It's not just for these. Yes, you want these incredible moments, but how do you create a life where you have lots of incredible moments?
Hmm.
And you know It's an interesting, I want to insert this because I've been so curious to what you would think about this. But when I think about optimal performance too, thinking about it from the perspective of being a woman, this is really interesting. Like, because females hormones are changing every
Mhm.
week, right? And so
Yeah.
some days, and I talk about this a lot, you guys, some days to my girls, literally, whether it's in the gym or it's mental work, my capacity at certain points of the month, it's just not the same as other points, right?
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean I'm not getting up and giving it my best, and it doesn't
Right.
mean that I'm not even kicking ass in that specific moment. It's just that that ass kicking could look and feel a little different than other points, but it's all about like where you're coming from, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
In your efforts. And that's where the optimal piece really is, just stands out to me, rather than just like every day trying to, hit 150. And then if you don't, then there's disappointment, then there's
Okay.
letdown and all that. So
Well, and in some ways, you're actually kicking ass even more when you're performing at those lows. I mean, because
sure.
you're doing things that you never thought you could do. And life is a sine wave. I always say if you take a piece of paper and just draw a straight line, and the left side of the line is when you were born, and the right side is now, right? And
Hmm.
then just start plotting the highlights, right, or the moments you can remember, and the highs are above the line and the lows are below the line. Okay, our lines are all going to look like a sine wave, a series of up and downs. And we all know, based on everything that we've learned experientially and everything we've learned in the best literature out there, is that we learn more from our lows oftentimes than we do our highs. And so the idea is performing optimally, performing the best you can, even in those lows, is going to teach you something, and probably teach you a lot more than those highs. It's nothing wrong with the highs. We have to enjoy them. We have to learn from them. We have to absorb them. But honor those lows, honor those antagonists, and work through them, and recognize that those moments where we are going step by step matter, and we're learning and we're growing from it, and we should pat ourselves on the back. We should not feel bad about, oh, I wasn't at my peak. Okay, who cares? You did the best you could, and
Right.
and not only be good with that, but pat yourself on the back for that, because that's what you see when you see people struggling and they make it through. Whether it's in the gym, whether it's on the battlefield, but really, I mean, the person struggled through cancer and made it. Friends of mine who've been injured, horrifically in the war, and they've had to work their way back, and they would tell me, "Hey, Rich, in some of those moments, I was living minute for minute,
Mm.
and that's really beautiful because they learned and they struggled. That's where the struggle is."
Yeah, gosh, when you say the word struggle, I'm thinking about an attribute that I'm so excited to talk about, perseverance, but I'm not going to touch that yet. I think I'm so excited about this because, for so many reasons, your book is incredible. You
Oh,
know,
thank you.
yeah, I mean, I cannot, this will be, I already know, and it already is one of the greatest books that I will be gifting to individuals, because this is also where we really connect. I my coaching, I was just mentioning to you, it's a lot of inside out tools, right? It's like
Mhm.
top down stuff, right?
Right.
And essentially it's really understanding who you are. So like going back to what you just said about these kind of low moments, I always say, like, you don't really know who the fuck you are until you get punched in the face. And I don't mean
Mhm.
that literally, unless you're a fighter, and there's a lot of fighters in my world, right? But I mean just like punched by life. And like you
Right.
really discover a lot about yourself. Now, when I say yourself, now because of your book, I'm thinking about attributes too.
Yeah.
Right. And this is important information,
Yeah.
because I believe that the more that you understand and you get clear on who you are, you also get clear on who it is that you want to further become in life. Right. And
Yeah.
I also have this belief that our self identity really shapes our reality. So if you
Mhm.
don't have a real good understanding of yourself, your core attributes, your core values, and things of this nature, then it's hard to really, decide who it is that you want to become. And then that roadmap isn't really there, right? So
Yeah.
let's go into attributes. One thing that I want to, that I think would be great to start this part of the conversation is, can you differentiate the difference between attributes and skills. I think it's a really powerful point of difference for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, the epiphany came when I was running my a version of SEAL training. It was training. It was assessment, selection, and training for one of our specialized SEAL commands. So it wasn't the basic underwater demolition SEAL training down in San Diego. It was a different command. And at this command, we were bringing in already experienced spec operators. So these were guys who already had 5 to 10 years experience as special operators, and running them through our process, and we were getting about a 50% attrition rate, which is okay. That's what any process, you're supposed to get some attrition. The problem was we weren't able to effectively describe it. We were saying things like, well, the guy couldn't make it because he couldn't shoot very well, or couldn't do this very well, and and it was very dissatisfying for us, because these were guys who'd done all of this before. So to say they couldn't do it very well didn't make sense, and it was really extraordinarily dissatisfying for them, because they're like, "What the hell? I've been doing this, right?" So we were coming up short on explanations. Kind of when I had to go back to basic SEAL training and ask myself, okay, what are we really doing when we're going through basic SEAL training, which is, again, for your audience, basic underwater demolition / SEAL training, BUDS for short, down there in San Diego, 6-month long course, some of the toughest training in the world. And I remember, you spend hundreds of hours in SEAL training running around with heavy boats on your head, and exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and running around with those things and freezing in the surf zone. And all I could think is I was in a position, I've done hundreds of combat missions overseas. I've done thousands of training evolutions. Never on one did I carry a boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole on my shoulder, right? So the question is, what were they doing during that? They weren't training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs in those moments. That what they were doing is they were putting us in environments that were teasing out these innate qualities, these attributes, to see if we had what it took to do the job. Not if we had the skills to do the job, if we had what it took to do the job. And so I knew there had to be a distinction there. And then, of course, I got out of the Navy and kept on getting questions from businesses. Hey, we're putting together these high-performing teams. The best this person, and we're putting them all together. And everything's going great for a little while, but when things go south and sideways, when the shit hits the fan, the team is turning toxic. And they're like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Well, you're picking your team based on the wrong things. You're picking based on skills. Skills are not inherent to our nature. Okay, none of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or shoot a gun or throw a ball. They teach us, they tell us what to do in certain situations, in known situations. Here's how and when to ride a bike. Here's how and when to shoot a gun. Here's how and when to throw a ball. And because they're specific and they're visible, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. The problem with them is they don't tell us how we're going to show up when the environment becomes deeply uncertain and challenging and stressful, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill to an unknown environment, right?
Right.
In the unknown environments, in uncertainty, we lean on our attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are more innate. Okay, all of us are actually born with levels of patience, situational awareness, adaptability, resiliency. Okay, certainly it develops over time and environment, but you can see levels of this stuff in small kids. Anybody who has kids will say, well, that 1-year-old is a patient kid, just naturally, and there's 1-year-olds who are not patient.
Yeah.
So you see the levels in small children. So they're innate. Okay, they're inherent. They also don't tell us, they don't direct our behavior. They actually inform how we're going to show up. So our levels of, or I say my son's levels of resilience and perseverance, informed the way he showed up when he was learning how to ride a bike, learning the skill of how to ride a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. All right, so they inform our behavior. And then finally, because they're hidden in the background, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. They really show up. So you can't sit, for example, in an interview process for a new hire. I can't sit across the table from someone in an interview process and tell how adaptable they are or how resilient they are. Okay. They are the most visible and visceral during times of challenge, uncertainty, and stress, which made the environment, the laboratory that I had in the SEALs, such a great environment to see this stuff. Because SEAL training, regardless of what kind of SEAL training, whether it's basic or advanced, it's always about stress, challenge, and uncertainty, right? So you can see this stuff pretty visibly. Why it matters for us is because, like you alluded to, we have to understand that so first, all of us have all of the attributes. Okay, the difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each. So for example, adaptability. If level 10 is high and 1's low, I might be a level 8 on adaptability, which means when the environment changes around me outside of my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow, to adjust, right? someone else might be a level 3, which means when the environment changes around them outside their control, it's pretty difficult. It's hard for them to change. It's difficult. It's painful. It's a tough process. No judgment on where we fall
Mhm.
on these attributes. It's like judging our hair color. There's nothing we can do
Right.
about it. Okay, it's useless. But knowing that, knowing that track, and so I always kind of talk about the attributes as a line of dimmer switches, and each
Okay.
switch is at a different level, and so every one of our lines are going to be different. What we have to recognize is that we're all human, okay, which is
Mhm.
something we all have to remember, especially today. Okay, we're all
Yeah.
human, but we're like vehicles. We're like cars. Okay, some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, some of us are SUVs. All right, again, no judgment, because the Jeep
Mhm.
can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. However, it would behoove us to lift our hoods and figure out what we are, what engine we have, because this is where we can actually execute and start realizing our potential. We may be a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track, or
Right.
a Ferrari trying to run on a Jeep track. And again, nothing wrong with that either. You can choose to do that. But if you know that you're a Jeep running on a Ferrari track, then it can better serve you in the way you can modify and train and get yourself running better on that track. It shows you where your highs and lows are. And so understanding our engine is really step number one, like you said,
Mhm.
to effectively exploring our potential. Because potential, by definition, is always in front of us, right? It's
Right.
always, potential is what could be. It's not what it is. And
Mhm.
so the only way we can explore it is to step out into discomfort to our edges. Like, it's kind of like looking at the horizon. I'm going to move to that horizon,
Mhm.
and that's cool, because once you get there, guess what shows up? The next horizon. Right? So
Mhm.
potential's always out there. And I think as humans, our process, the most powerful thing we can do is to continue to explore our edges and move. And that's how we grow, because that radius just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. And I think attributes, understanding that about ourselves, is one of the first steps.
Yeah, yeah. I so agree with all that. I love it so much. I always talk about, you say edges, I say ledges. It's like
Yeah.
the same, right? And I have this creed under my brand. It's seek the fight. And it
Yeah.
essentially means like, you got to move towards the fights in your life.
Right.
You got to move because usually on the other side of the fight is, something that you desire to experience, to attain, all of that. And it's in that fight that you are, learning about yourself, that you're developing yourself. And, one of like people often come to me, to talk about self-confidence, self-trust.
Hmm.
And I got to pick your brain on that stuff. For that reason, because a lot of people tune in for, how do we develop more self-confidence? How do we develop more self-trust? And I'll just touch on that answer from my perspective, but then, pass the mic to you for that. But I can't, in my own life, the way that I have developed self confidence is by doing hard shit and by
Hmm.
witnessing
Yeah.
myself do the hard shit. And having this sort of what I frame as like this, the heart of an underdog and the mindset of a champion. It's like, yeah, I'm going to get punched. Life is going to put me on my knees, but I'm always getting back up and I'm always finding ways to get better in the getting back up part. Right.
Right.
And, so a couple things that come to my mind, are like resilience, courage, and these attributes that you so beautifully talk about. I say talk because as I feel that you're such a great writer, I can hear you talking to me in your writing in the book. Diving into these specific attributes, I think are so valuable for individuals to really understand, like, what does it even mean to be resilient? What
Hmm.
is courage really? I mean, we know it on a surface level, but to go deeper into, these attributes, the way that you, explain them in your book, I think is so helpful to getting in the arena and doing the hard shit to cultivate the self-confidence and self-trust, etc.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me take a moment to highlight your brilliance,
Thank
and
you. Thank you.
because seek the fight is actually a brilliant thing to think, and the reason is actually not necessarily philosophical, but neurological,
Mhm.
and it's because when we start experiencing fear, okay, our amygdala starts to kick in. We our physiology, our brains start to present to us two choices: either fight or flight. Okay.
Mhm.
Now we've heard the freeze. We've heard fight, flight, or freeze, right? But
Right.
freeze is actually freeze is really just an oscillation. There's no neurological kind of circuit for freeze. It's really an oscillation. It's a kind of a decision between the two, right? So it's either fight or flight. there's separate circuits in the brain for each decision. Okay, when we decide to fight, which is, again, it's not just like put up your dukes, right, and then throw a punch. When we decide to step into our fear, right, a circuit in our brain switches. It's, my buddy Andrew Huberman calls it the courage circuit. Okay, when that circuit flips, we get a dopamine reward. Now, most people know what dopamine is, right? It's the neurotransmitter that tells us, hey, this feels great, keep doing it. It's actually the core of most addictive behaviors, right? Because you get dopamine. But we get a dopamine hit for stepping into our fear. Okay, now this doesn't mean we're stepping into our fear and everything's done, right? We're reaching the accomplishment. Every time we step, we get a dopamine hit, and this is by evolutionary design. We are designed as humans to seek, to explore, to discover. So nature needed to find a way to encourage us to keep on moving, right? And so it set up this reward system to encourage us to keep on stepping in. So when you seek the fight, you're literally setting up a reward system, okay? And when we decide to step into our fear, we're rewarded. And now, again, let's not we would not devalue flee, because sometimes the right call is to run away. Okay, right. But the idea is that was much more kind of evolutionarily designed for survival, for threat to life. A lot of times in today's modern society, we fear things that really we shouldn't, or we're imagining, or present more than they do, right? And so we just have to start thinking about fear differently. It's definitely good because it allows us to assess risk. I say beware the fearless leader. That's dangerous. That person will get you killed. So we don't want to be fearless. But what we do want to explore is, why are we afraid, and can we actually step into this? Because if we decide to, it will feel great, and that's really very rewarding.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I so agree. And I love that you have, you and Andrew work together, and there's so much of that, neuroscience, neurobiology in the book too. It's one of my favorite subjects. I mean, how do you not, when you're thinking about human potential, you cannot ignore that subject. So I love that there's so much integration in that subject into the book. One thing that I have to tell you is that I did the incredible tests, the assessment tests.
Great. Good.
Yeah. So, and I thought it could be fun to just kind of read you my scores, and then, that can kind of bridge us into some of the sections of attributes that you share in the book. So, and it was so interesting. So in grit, courage was medium. I'll just leave the numbers out and just say medium.
Yeah.
Which was interesting, but I'll leave the comments for after. Perseverance was medium. That was fucking surprising for me. I'm like, I feel like I'm persevering every day, but okay. Adaptability was high. Resilience was high. Not a shocker. Mental acuity, I aced this. Highs on situational awareness, compartmentalization, task switching, and learnability. Drive, that was one of my favorites to go through. Self-efficacy was high. Discipline was high. Open-mindedness, medium. Cunning was high. Narcissism was medium. And I can't wait to touch on that one with you, because people probably are like, narcissism, that's an attribute. So, I mean, first, and the, obviously this will be in the show notes, but I cannot suggest everybody who listens to this and watches this podcast to go do these assessment tests. They're so valuable. And I know, and you can speak on this, it's like a broad, it's not like, oh, that's it. It's not how do I say
it's not definitive.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. But it gives you a good, like when I think about courage, medium. Yeah. Because here's the thing. I'm not the person who wants to jump out of the fucking plane. Like not you in the dark, like night diving, like, no, but I am the woman that will go out and surf I lived in Hawaiian waves, or launch my business and do things that, from a mental aspect, like position me where I'm very introverted. I prefer to I'm not the girl who's like, hey, everybody look at me.
Right.
So even launching my podcast 3.5 years ago, like that was a push on me, but I'm like, my mission was so strong that I pushed forward. So there's courage in that, but,
well, and courage, by the way, courage is completely subjective, right? I mean, it's like, and what's interesting about courage is that what makes us afraid is entirely subjective. The responses inside our physiology are all common, right? And so, in other words, people are like, oh, sometimes I had someone say to me once, they said, I'm so nervous. I don't like public speaking. I'm so nervous to get in front of this crowd. But why am I telling you that? You're a Navy SEAL, right? You've been in combat. And what I said to them is like, listen, don't downplay, okay? Because the same level of stress I might have gotten in a gunfight overseas
Mhm.
could be the exact same level of stress, if not less, than what you're feeling when you step onto that stage. Because physiologically, there's no difference whether you're a kid in a spelling bee pitcher in the World Series or a Navy SEAL in combat, right? So courage becomes subjective, which is fascinating, but also speaks to why this assessment tool is really designed to have the user be introspective, which I'm so glad you did. So obviously, I'd recommend someone read the book first and then take the
Yes.
assessment. You don't have to. You don't have to. You can take it whenever you want. But by reading the book, what it'll allow you to do is allow you to enter into that assessment with a little bit more background on what each attribute is. And
Totally.
the book, I think you'll agree, the book allows you to do a little bit of introspection anyway while you're reading
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
because what you want to do when you take the assessment is really think about the questions and and
Hmm.
and put them inside your own context, and then realize, which again you also did, when you get those scores are, it's a snapshot, it's a comparison to a bunch of data that we got. So in other words, your scores on all those attributes are compared to this group of 1,000 plus people that we had,
Right.
which means you take that and you say, okay, does this score make sense to me,
Hmm.
and further introspect. And so some of the people who've gotten back to me said, hey, I love this assessment tool because it's allowed me to think about things in ways I haven't thought about, right? So instead of getting focused on the score, they're actually thinking about themselves in different ways, and that's
Hmm.
really the real win, which is cool.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, because some of the questions, I mean, the whole process of the assessment test is really, it helps you to just think and then to, I mean, and this is another gift of your book. It's really helping an individual understand themselves more.
Yeah.
And like I said at the top of the conversation, it's like I feel that the more that we get a grip and we understand ourselves, it's like it's at that quote, anything that could be measured can be improved.
Hmm.
If you don't have an understanding of, and this is such a compliment to your writing again, because you do this beautiful job of like storytelling and then explaining things, so it's very entertaining but so educational at the same time, and allows space for the individual reading to go into self and to kind of think about like, resilience, or I mean, the mental acuity was really interesting because
Hmm.
I don't think the majority of individuals are thinking about task switching or
Right.
compartmentalization, but
Yeah.
this is really valuable information,
Yeah.
to attain. And then also, to think about, well, how can I, if I'm here to live from my fullest potential, how do I take that compartmentalization attribute and up level it, And so,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
Well, if
yeah.
I were to, it's interesting because the categories, I didn't have the categories when I started writing the book.
Mhm.
I had just the attributes, and then as I started writing, I realized that they were binning into these kind of clumps. They were clumping pretty nicely, and that excited me because it's like, man, these are getting. I'm actually able to explain them. Ultimately, if I were to put the attributes in order, mental acuity ones would probably come first because everything starts there. Everything starts in our nervous system, our brain. So
Yeah.
our levels of grit, and all of our levels of adaptability and courage, it all starts with how we process information, which is where the mental acuity attributes lie. But the clumps began to really allow some clarity
Hmm.
and say, okay, in this category that we often think of as humans, what are the attributes that exist? And so I'll just go through the categories so
Yeah.
people. So grit, most people have thought about grit, me included, for a little while, that grit was an attribute in of itself, and
Hmm.
and and as I thought about it, I was like, this doesn't make sense. And then, of course, a few years ago, Angela Duckworth came out with a great book called Grit, and she says
Hmm.
basically the same thing. It's a bunch of things, right? And
Yeah.
so so grit really speaks to our ability, the attributes that contribute to grit speak to our ability to persevere, to punch through, to move through challenges. And it's more concerned with kind of shorter term stuff,
Hmm.
right? It's not necessarily longer term. When we start getting longer term stuff, we get into drive, right? So
Right.
grit speaks to this kind of power through, burst through, persevere, kind of short term. Then we get into the mental acuity ones. Mental acuity is really how our brain processes the world, right?
Hmm.
Oh, let me. And so the grit ones are courage, adaptability, perseverance, and resilience. Those are the four.
Mhm.
Mental acuity is, okay, how are we taking in information, right? Situational awareness. From that information, how are we assessing it, prioritizing it, and focusing? That's
Mhm.
compartmentalization. Inside of our activity, how are we swapping tasks and contexts and categories, in either ways moving from one focus point to another? That's task switching.
Mhm.
And then inside of all of that, how rapidly are we absorbing those lessons, so the things that we're seeing? That's learnability. So those four start to speak to how we process the world, and how different people in different walks of life can process things faster than others, or process things slower, and both have advantages, right? So
Yeah.
um, so that's what mental acuity speaks to. And then, of course, you get into the drive. Drive is really concerned with the longer term goals. Okay, I'm gonna set a goal that's going to take a while to achieve. And what are
Mhm.
those attributes that speak to our ability to kind of do that and move towards it to accomplishment? That's the drive one. And those are self-efficacy, discipline, open-mindedness, cunning, and narcissism, which we can get into. Um,
Yeah.
and then finally, there's leadership attributes. So what are the attributes that make up great leaders? Again, as from a leadership aspect, I say, we often conflate being in charge with being a leader. They're not the same thing. Okay, one's a
Mhm.
noun and one's a verb. Leadership is a behavior, and you don't get to call yourself a leader. Okay, that's like calling yourself good looking or funny. Other
Mhm.
people decide that, right? Other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow, which then
Mhm.
makes you a leader. That's done based on the way you behave, and these are the attributes that contribute to that, which are empathy, selflessness, authenticity, decisiveness, and accountability. And then the same thing with team ability, your ability to effectively operate in a team with other people. You don't
Mhm.
get to call yourself a great teammate, other people
Yeah.
do. And the behaviors that allow others to designate you that are come from the attributes of integrity, conscientiousness, humility, and humor. And then there's like some other ones we can get into too that didn't
Yeah.
really bin neatly into those categories, and we can talk about those later if we want to.
Yeah, for sure, which were so interesting. I mean, when you think about all these bins, these are all ingredients to kick ass in life, like to
Yeah,
understand,
yeah,
like truly, like
yeah,
when you're talking about mental acuity, the attributes. There's one person that comes to my mind. This will make you laugh, but it's always somebody that I've admired, Jason Bourne, because like
yeah,
like
yeah,
this is a bad motherfucker. Like he's in a room, he knows every emergency exit. Like the way that they film it, they're showing his brain
yeah,
compartmentalization, learnability, task
yeah,
switching, all the things. And so that's stuff I've always I grew up with three brothers. I have a sister too. And so I've always admired that kind of brain that could, that has that capacity and can move through life like that. So,
yeah,
but did I know that it was compartmentalization, task switching? No, but now I do. And
yeah.
that's, it's so
Well, what it's
awesome.
interesting also is because so the high level. So Jason Bourne is the Hollywood version, right, of how that manifests in real life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and what I found in my community of SEALs is most of us were pretty high on those levels of
Mhm.
mental acuity because we had to really process things fast. However, you look at other communities, and the ability to kind of process things fast and move fast and swap thing and kind of switch focus, that doesn't make sense. Like, I talked to Huberman, and he's really good at deep focus, which is what a
Yeah.
scientist has to be. My
Right.
wife, she's someone who can when she focuses on something, I mean, she is just a monster. I mean, she
Hmm.
just gets things done like no other. I mean, she's brilliant at it. She's really good at that.
Hmm.
And so those so again, what someone has to recognize is where they fall out is not, there's no judgment on that. It's really,
Right.
it helps you start to understand, in fact, in what environments you're the most strong. And that's really very powerful.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I mean, okay, so Drive, the other, this is like a lifelong hero of mine. I'm thinking of Rocky. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
it's like, that perseverance. And I love how you break it down too, like tenacity, you talk about, because all of these again are so important. I mean, each attribute it's like its own book in a way,
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's,
it's
it's
so
pretty
it's
dense. I realize.
it is, and again, like, but you move through it all in such a way where you can really absorb each attribute, think about it, and then decide how it is. Well, actually, this bridges the question: how does an individual, and it might not be a fast, easy answer because all of them are so different, but let me ask you this question first: can you train attributes?
Right, right. I wouldn't say train. I would say, because I
Okay.
think train I reserve for skill.
Okay.
because train often means repetition,
Mhm.
and there's a certainty to training that has to exist so that you may train.
Okay.
What I say is you can develop an attribute, but developing an attribute is different than training a skill. First of all, so quick back of the envelope test
Okay.
to tell whether or not it's an attribute or a skill, because they get conflated all the time, is to ask yourself, can I teach it or can it be taught? If the
Mhm.
answer is yes, it's likely a skill. If the answer is no, it's likely an attribute. The example would be, Roxy, if you said, "Hey, Rich, I want to go to the range and learn how to shoot a gun and hit a bullseye every time." I say, "Fine, I could take you to the range. I could teach you how to do that in 2 hours, right? That's a skill."
Mhm.
But if you said, "Hey, Rich, I want to actually learn how to be more adaptable or more patient," I can't teach you how to do that, right? I can't sit down and teach you. So developing an attribute it takes self-motivation, self-direction, and then it takes a willingness for you or that person to step into discomfort and uncertainty so they may test that attribute. So if you are impatient and want to develop your patience, you must go seek environments that test your patience. All right.
Yeah.
So stand in the long line pick the longest line at the grocery store and stand in that, or
Yeah.
go go driving when you know it's rush hour and there's
I was
traffic
gonna
or whatever
say
it is. Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So, um,
405
the
midday.
405 midday, right? Or any time of the day, actually, nowadays, right?
Right. Yeah.
so, um, so yeah, so you have to. So it takes a deliberacy, it takes a self effort, and I would also offer, and I could be wrong on this. I hope that I am, but I haven't seen this happen. Is I'm not sure if you can achieve unconscious competence in an attribute that you're low on. In other words,
Mhm.
you can do it without thinking about it. I think you can achieve conscious competence, which is I can do it, but I have to think about it while I'm doing it. And it's just because it's not we're moving against something that's natural for us, right? So in other words, someone who's naturally impatient
Mhm.
may have kids and develop patience with their children. Okay. That may not translate to other people's children. Okay.
Right.
And it may not translate to sitting in traffic or whatever it is. Right. So sometimes these are so subjective that they're contextual as well.
Sure.
So the key is figure out if you are deficient on an attribute, because you don't have to develop the ones you're deficient. It really depends on what you need
Yeah.
in the track you're on. But if you do want to develop one, figure out where and how and what context you want to develop it in, and then you have to seek the fight,
Seek the
right? Like you
fight.
say. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. When you talk about context, and something that came to my mind is discipline versus self-discipline, because that's something
Yeah.
that you talk about in the book. And I don't think a lot of people realize that there is an actual difference. So can you
Hmm.
talk about that a bit? Because it's so important.
Yeah, I had to get vulnerable with myself to figure this one out because because there felt like I was a difference, and I had to ask myself why. And the reason why I figured it out is because I said, I am when it comes to discipline, which is kind of the ability to achieve a goal that is a little bit longer term, and the achievement of which is there the external world has a say. In other words, there's factors that are going to hit you, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to take adaptability and flexibility and like moving and bobbing and weaving, and it's going to take grit.
Hmm.
I'm pretty good at that. I have been my whole life, right? I mean, a
Hmm.
kid from Connecticut who wasn't really a big athlete, and I became a Navy SEAL, right? So I
Hmm.
know how to do that, and I've done it a couple times. I am horrible at self-discipline. I really am. I always have been. And so, but self-discipline is different. Self-discipline are those things that you can do, or even goals you want to achieve that are completely internal, that the external
Hmm.
world has no say. Okay, this is actually like getting in shape or
Yeah.
eating well. Okay, you can decide to do that, and then 2 days in, you can be at the buffet in Vegas, right? And the buffet is not going to throw the junk food at you. It's up to you whether or not you have the healthy stuff or the pastries, right? So self discipline involves goals and things that are internally focused, and the external world has no say.
Hmm.
Overall discipline involves those things that the external world does have a say. The reason why there's a difference, and we all know people who are extraordinarily self disciplined,
Hmm.
but they can't seem to get their long-term goals off. I mean, they're just horrible. They're a mess when it comes to
Yeah.
long-term goals, right? But they're
Yeah.
really self-disciplined. And then there are
Right.
other people we see who are extraordinarily unself-disciplined, but their
Right.
overall long-term discipline is phenomenal, right?
Right.
And the reason why, so the best is a balance of both, obviously.
Yeah.
Sometimes too much self-discipline can actually impede your ability to be disciplined, because too much self-discipline often requires certainty and predictability, right?
Mm,
A routine, okay?
yeah.
And anybody who's achieved a long-term goal that the external world has a say on, whether it's a Navy SEAL, whether it's winning a contest, whether it's a singer, whatever, will know that it's always going to, the pathway is always going to change. You're going to have to adapt. It's never going to be predictable, right? And then,
Yeah.
so I always say, when it comes to long-term discipline, and the discipline I talk about in the book, always be resolute in your outcome, but be flexible in the approach. Okay. And
So
so,
good.
and this is where rock climbers can teach us a lot. And of course, as you know, I don't like heights, so I don't climb rocks, but, but the rock climber stands at the base of the cliff or the mountain and says, "Okay, top. That's where I'm
Hmm.
going." And then probably does a quick map out of, okay, here's how I think I'm going to move up this face, and then begins to climb. And inevitably, during that climb, we'll recognize that as they look for the best handholds and footholds, that original path is not necessarily the path they're going to go on. They're going to have to kind of move and adjust, and then sometimes they're going to, in fact, have to go like right and down to find the next
Mm,
best foothold, which means sometimes when we're moving towards our goal, we're actually feel like we're moving away from it,
mm.
because we're trying to find the best foothold to get back up, and we'll lose sight of the top sometimes too. You have to actually be flexible, and sometimes too much self-discipline, too much um, reliance on routine
Hmm.
can impede that ability to do that. So there's a separation we have to recognize.
It's so, so powerful. I mean, especially the step down. I mean, people don't necessarily think of that, but I have a morning ritual. I get up, I read for a couple hours and I meditate, I journal, and it's consistent. And then I get my movement in. However, and this is where, like I always say, Bruce Lee is like a soulmate to me, because I love his ideas on, don't no systems, like
Mm,
don't get crystallized. And it's not to say that a routine isn't great. I have routines. I am very self-disciplined and I love it. But let's just say, as an example, to paint a picture, one morning I wake up and the urgency to want to move puts me, I'm not going to read as much, or I'm not going to even journal that day or whatever, but I'm responding to this feeling that I have inside and I'm going. Okay.
hmm
That doesn't mean that, oh no, my perfect morning ritual and now I'm falling apart. You don't want to be rigid. You
Yeah,
want that, I always say, like, I have these funny statements, but like, you can't snap a string. And so
right.
there's, right. And so there's
Yeah.
so much power, but most people aren't thinking like a string. That's not powerful, right?
And well, this speaks to another attribute, which is adaptability. And this is where a lot of your audience, I know you hang with the fighter crowd, right?
Yeah.
Where I think, so athletics holistically only give us a little bit of sense of the attributes, because depending on the sports are fairly predictable, right? If you have
Hmm.
football, basketball field, I mean, there are boundaries and rules. There's yard lines. There's things you have to stay. So there's a lot of constraints and boundaries built within some sports. Okay, which means
Right.
it's fairly predictable and certain. But one sport that I think is phenomenal for adaptability is fighting, is combat fighting. And I don't fight really, at all. I got some training, but I'm not really a fighter.
Yeah.
But I know, just in knowing fighters and observing that world, you can have any plan you want as a fighter, and you can train all the different skills and stuff. But once you begin the fight, you are highly adaptable. It's like okay, I plan A, B, and C, but the person fighting me might do like G or F, which means I
Right.
have to which means I have to change on the fly. And I think fighting, especially when you start getting into like the MMA, and where you're just like,
Hmm.
it's like very few rules, and you could be on the ground, you're talking about a level of A, mental acuity training, and B, adaptability training and development that is really, really high, because you're having to read the environment every moment and adapt to what you're seeing in the fighting
Right.
world. And I'm saying this as someone who observes it, not really as someone who's done a lot of fighting, but I would imagine most of the people who fight would agree with that. And I'd say from a athletic standpoint, those are really just fruitful training grounds for adaptability, for resiliency, the grit attributes. I don't know if they've done studies on what athletes make it through SEAL training the most, and they couldn't find that many sports. In the early days, they found that wrestlers did very well, and this was
Mm.
before. I don't know if they've done any recent ones, but wrestling's kind of that same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
wrestlers are constantly having to adapt, right? So it's
Right.
that, and I think it just sets you up mentally well.
Yeah, no, totally. It's one of the most powerful tools in MMA. And even if you think about weight cutting, the discipline and all that, that's a
Yeah,
hardcore thing to do, right? So yeah, I know,
right.
I love that. And I'm a jujitsu girl. I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I mean, that's one of the ways that I get I get to develop this discomfort, like being comfortable in discomfort.
Right.
Because when you
Right.
have, a 200-pound guy on me, I mean, granted, the overall environment is safe and I know that, but it's still a combative sport. I've been
Yeah.
injured, like things can happen, right? And learning how to be comfortable, to have a great relationship with my nervous system is how I put it, to find levels of comfort in discomfort is really powerful. And jujitsu is a pathway for me to develop that. MMA, I agree. I mean, one of the greatest aspects of enjoying the sport is you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's like in the last 2 seconds, the whole shit can change. Like,
Yes. Yeah.
which
And
is
you
so,
get comfortable with that. So a good friend
yeah.
of mine, his name is Josh Waitskin. I don't know if you
Yeah.
know
Oh,
Josh.
and
Yeah.
he's
Yeah,
brilliant.
so yeah, he's brilliant. So Josh
Yeah.
and I were good friends, and he and I would before COVID, we'd meet up in New York and have whenever I was there, we'd have breakfast or something, and we'd chat. And I always loved talking to him. And he, obviously for the audience who don't know him, he was a chess champion by the age of, I mean, national chess champion by the age of, no, world chess champion by the age of 16. And then after that, stopped playing chess, and then became in 3 years the Tai Chi push hands champion.
Yeah.
And but anyway, he used to talk about his strategy for chess. And I remember asking him, I was like, "What was your?" And he talks about it in the book. I just wanted to hear him say it, but he said, "I said, what was your strategy?" And he said, "I became so good." And if you read the book, he wrote a book called Art of Learning, The Art of Learning. A great book if anybody wants to check it out. He talked about how he learned chess on the streets of New York with just these old guys who he used to play with, and it was a highly dynamic, unpredictable environment inside of which you can play chess, because you just never knew what was going to happen. There was no structure to it. And he said his strategy, he used to deliberately, when he used to be against an opponent, he used to deliberately create chaos on the chessboard, because he knew, and in doing so, he didn't know if he was going to win. He didn't, by creating chaos, he didn't know what the outcome would. He just knew he'd be more comfortable in chaos than his opponent, right? And he took that to some of his fighting techniques too, right? He just knew how to, let's just create chaos, because I know at the end of the day I'm more comfortable in chaos than this guy is, or gal. And that's incredible. I mean, it's a really, so you talk about true confidence, I think true confidence actually stems from one's ability to understand that regardless of how the environment goes, you'll figure it out, and I think people ask you what you get from SEAL training. I think that's what you get from SEAL training. You come out of SEAL training with true confidence, because you come out understanding, hey, I just went through something that was really incredibly difficult, and I'm here and I performed through it. And then as you hyper develop that through a career, you just have the sense, hey, when the environment, deteriorates, I'm gonna perform. I always say I live here in Virginia. In my neighborhood, I have 3 other SEALs who live right on my street. Okay, I have one across the street, I have one down the road to the left, one down the road to the right, and I remember my wife saying, she said, I'm so glad these guys are here, because if anything ever happened and I needed help, I could go to them and they'd act like you act. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, if I went to them and something was going on, they'd immediately calm down and they'd start working the problem, right? Because that's what you develop in the SEAL teams. You develop this ability to just start, if the shit starts raining, right? You're just like, okay, calm down, work the problem. What can I, and that's true confidence, I think, at the end of the day.
Oh God, you're speaking to my heart. I mean, this is stuff I talk about all the time in every channel of mine, but I love writing about this. I'm a lifelong writer. I talk about just composure, equanimity, and it makes me think about confidence versus self-confidence, if there's a difference. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. And then also, when you, like what you just described so beautifully, how I always say like true self-confidence, because we know that there's a lot of like pseudo confidence, and
Yeah.
how that is developed is this like external validation, people feeling like, oh, this is who I am because this is what you're saying who I am. And that, but to me, it's so in alignment with what you just said. True self-confidence, I just say self-confidence, it has to come from the witnessing and the knowing that you persevere, you have pushed through, you've done hard shit, you've faced fear and challenges and all those things, and you got up and you maybe you won, or you just survived, but surviving is winning too. Right, in those situations. Yeah, it's so powerful. What do you think about that though, like self-confidence versus confidence? Do you think that there's a difference?
I love that you brought this up, because I've never thought about it, and I'm so glad you did, because I love semantics.
Me
and
too.
I love breaking down. So yeah, So let's talk about this, because as
Yeah.
you're saying it, I'm thinking, and I think you're right. I think self-confidence is what we're talking about. I think confidence, perhaps, like I'll just throw this out there. Maybe
Mhm.
perhaps confidence has to do with skills. Okay, I'm confident I can drive a car. If I were to tell you I'm self-confident I can drive a car, that would sound weird, right? So
Right.
confidence might deal with might speak to skills. I'm confident I can do this or do that skill. Self-confidence perhaps speaks to your ability just to be and perform in environments, so both are good and both are necessary, right?
Mhm.
You need to actually in fact have some self-confidence in life. You need to be confident in certain skills, right?
Yeah.
But I think there is a difference, and I think it's a remarkable one, and I think we should strive for both. I think ultimately, though, if you want to lean on self-confidence, will probably be harder to develop, because
Mhm.
it has to do with your ability to operate in certainty. And then, of course, just make sure that whatever it is doesn't bleed into arrogance, because there's a difference there too, obviously. Confidence is internally focused, and it's I can do this, whereas arrogance is externally expressed as I'm better than you. And that's not what the master thinks, right? The
Mhm.
master thinks I'm confident, but I can always learn. So
Mhm.
we have to be careful about not bleeding over into arrogance.
Oh, it's so good. That's so good. Wait, you said something in there too that I got to pick on because it's something that I want to talk about. You said certainty. I heard certainty. And a
Yeah,
question that I really wanted to present to you is when you hear the word uncertainty, what do you think about?
opportunity. um, because it's unknown, right? I mean, it's that's discovery.
Mhm.
I think you know, I mean, uncertainty is potential. Uncertainty is discovery. Uncertainty is exploration. Certainly, there's bad connotations of uncertainty, but it doesn't empower us. It doesn't do us much good to think about the bad connotations. Uncertainty is life. It really is,
Mhm.
because we are not. This world is inherently unpredictable.
Mhm.
Even though we have laws of nature and things that we've figured out, science is helping us put more predictability around the universe.
Sure.
But ultimately, even science is the first genre to say we still don't know. I mean, we don't know what we don't
Right.
know. We're starting to discover, right? Nothing's certain. It's all. So I think that's where I am fascinated with potential, just like you are. And potential is what could be, and what could be is uncertain. And that's why I like uncertainty.
Oh, it's so good. So one of my favorite words, I don't know if you ever heard of it. I did not invent it, but I always say like, I'm a possibilitarian because it's so
Yeah,
good. When you think about, what if, right? Uncertainty's favorite question. And this goes back to like neurobiology, right? So you can look at what if from a very fear-based mentality.
hmm,
What if I don't know, the fear starts kicking in. But you can look at that same question. So I'm into semantics too, obviously. And you can look at it with excitement because there's possibility,
yeah,
there's discovery on the other end. And it's
yeah,
crazy how just that different lens of looking at it from the what if I don't know and that fear-based mentality versus the possibility being a
yeah.
possibilitarian is going to literally from a neurobiology perspective like change how you move towards uncertainty, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
because
this is the this is I think what separates us, and we don't know. Again, it separates us from every other species. And again, we admit we don't know. There's some species that but as insofar as we know, humans are the only ones who can actually um, envision and think about that which does not exist. Okay, and in doing so, that implies this what if, right? But this is where our natural curiosity begins to work together, because there are the what if people, and then there are the how people. And so the what if people might be the creatives who say, hey, what if? And then the scientists say, okay, cool, how, right? Both those questions are empowering questions, and both move us forward.
forward, yeah.
And I think that it's the mindsets that really I try to stay away from, that have stopped asking that.
Mhm.
Because again, as human beings, we also love certainty. We want to, but which makes us say the word question how and why. Because
Mhm.
we're always trying to figure out in our environment, because we want to be certain about it. But the downside of that is sometimes we make up things and make up stories that explain things we make up stories to explain things that have no basis in reality, but we
Right.
hang our hat on them anyway, which is tough, right?
Totally.
So I
Right.
think that open-mindedness, that kind of possibilitarianism
Yeah, it's so
is so important, right?
possibilitarian. It
Yeah.
is. One of my favorite quotes that I would love for you to elaborate on, because I think it's so valuable and to insert it into this amazing conversation, is control the controllables.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because I feel like that is, it's something that I like to talk about with my community, because I think there's so much value in it, but I want you to explain it. You could do it a lot better than me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let me just quickly. I quickly to do that. I have to quickly just describe what fear is. Okay.
Okay.
Fear is a combination of anxiety plus uncertainty. Okay.
Mhm.
And when you combine the two, you get great fear. You can have one without the other, and you don't have fear show up. Right. You can be anxious without being uncertain. That's like, hey, I'm nervous for the presentation that's coming up. I know where it's going to be. I know what it is. I know the crowd. I'm just a little nervous. Right. That's anxiety without uncertainty. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Okay. That's every kid on Christmas Eve. All right. When you start to combine the two, that's when fear starts to show up, right? The way you can manage your fear, in other words, keep that amygdala hijack from happening and keep your frontal lobe online, is to buy down either one of those two components. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
if you want to get conscious thinking first, you should buy down anxiety first. We can do that by managing your physiology. It's all anxiety is all internal, right? So you can do
Mhm.
that by breathing techniques, visual techniques, things like that Huberman talks about all the time, but things that help calm you and shift you from sympathetic to parasympathetic. That's how you do anxiety. Then you can say, I'm going to buy down uncertainty. Now, the only way you can do that, because the uncertain world is external and you can't really control it, is to begin asking yourself some questions, okay, about that environment. What about this do I understand? And from that, what can
Mhm.
I control? This is what it means to control the controllables. In the SEALs, there's a saying called "control your 3-foot world," right? So the other words, out of the stuff I understand, what can I control right now? What can I move to in this moment? As soon as you decide to do that, this is, by the way, how you step through uncertainty, challenge, and stress. As soon as you decide to make that movement, you are hit with a dopamine reward. And you make that, I shouldn't say, you decide and you make that movement, you're hit with a dopamine reward, which
Mhm.
allows you to pull back out and ask the question again.
Mhm.
And you say, okay, now what can I control? Okay, you do that. Now what can I control? And the extent to which you move that lens, right, or that horizon, is up to you, right? That could be, I'm waiting. It could be you're in hell week. I was like, I'm just gonna make it to the next meal, or it could be you're in hell week and I was like, I'm just gonna go the next 10 steps. Okay,
Yeah.
whatever that is, as long as it has meaning to you, you just created you just took control of an uncontrolled of an uncertain environment, which is
Yeah.
what humans like. You've rewarded yourself neurologically and neurophysiologically, with a neurotransmitter, and then
Mhm.
allowed yourself to do it again. And so, controlling the controllables is a strategy for moving through uncertainty, challenge, and stress. You just have to be able to cognitively ask those questions. What can I control in this moment, and just decide to move to that.
It's so powerful. And it just makes me think it's like you are essentially like you're kind of slowing things down too,
Yeah.
right? Because when you're feeling nervous, anxious, or fear, things kind of you're moving faster. You're not present, right?
Right. Right.
Literally anxious, you're like, so control the controllables, like brings you into the present moment, get into your body, work that nervous system to get into the parasympathetic state. And then think about like everything you just said. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's so valuable because
Yeah.
listen, last year was like one of the greatest examples of people dealing
Yeah.
with
Totally.
uncertainty.
Yeah.
I always say, like, prior to my by launching my brand and podcast and coaching business, I worked as a freelance artist, and I'm like, listen, people, 2020, I have lived uncertainty like as a norm, like
Right.
week by week, you don't know what's next. And and it really did help me though. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Because when you're thinking about like livelihood as a freelance artist and you don't know what's coming next, you're just kind of living on hope and your belief and doing what is necessary to keep driving forward. And I got to the top 1% of my career for a reason.
Yeah.
I had to endure a lot of uncertainty as a
Yeah.
constant. So when 2020 hit, for sure it was different, it's a different stimulus, but yeah, the uncertainty aspect was not unfamiliar to me.
Well, and it's a
So
great example of why you were able to read the book, for example, and start to say, "Oh, okay, this makes sense to me," because you have so many environments inside of which you were able to see those attributes on
yeah.
display, which is so I would offer anybody who doesn't maybe have that portfolio of uncertainty that you do, but we all have a common one, which is 2020. Okay, so
Right.
we all have an ability. We all have this, I guess, gift
Mhm.
of this year that was so horrific in so many different ways that we
Yeah.
can look back and say, okay, wait, how did I perform? What showed up and what didn't, and you can use that. In fact, we can use all of our. I call them antagonists. The antagonists of life, right? Because antagonists can be anything. In the theatrical definition, a protagonist is the person, place, or thing that is for the main idea, and the antagonist is the person, place, or thing that is against the main idea. Well, we all have antagonists, whether it's a actual person, whether it's an event, whether it's an illness, a divorce, or a layoff, whatever. We
Yeah.
all have antagonists, and to effectively autopsy our antagonists, we can look back and say, okay, how did I perform? What did I learn? How did I grow? This, by the way, is also the secret to resilience and anti-fragility, is if you can effectively and uh, objectively
Mhm.
look back at an event. Again, you have to try to have most emotion gone, because if you're still emotional about it, it's not going to work properly. But if you
Sure.
can if you can get most emotion gone from it and look back and reflect effectively, you will in essence grow from that antagonist. And you will also learn something about yourself. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, I'm not that adaptable. Okay, so I got to note that. I got to note that when the environment changes around me, it's going to be painful. All right, got it. Again, no judgment. Just know it's going to be a little bit tough, and I might want to develop that. Even if I don't develop it, just know it's going to be tough, right?
It's
So
so
that
good.
knowledge is powerful, right?
It's so powerful. Yeah, last year and parts of some of my podcasts, some episodes I do as solo sods. I talk about for me, it's not just about like getting to the goal, moving through the challenge. It's about who am I between this space? Like who am I? And I'm very aware and I'm always watching like, I to me composure is very sexy. Like it
Mhm.
just is. And it doesn't mean that there's always like tons of composure. I mean, every challenge is gonna, it's a different stimulus. It's gonna, like it makes me think of dormant attributes, right? Something that you talk
Yeah, yeah,
about
yeah. That's
in
right. Yeah.
the, and I'd love to touch on that. But it's like for me, I want to hold my shit together as much as possible. Like there's no better way to say it,
Roxy, it's funny
because
though. I'd love to see the person who thinks panic is sexy. That'd be
yeah,
funny to. So anyway, I was just.
plot twist.
That's right. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, like listen, I have a relationship with my future self. She's a badass, and one of the greatest things about her, I converse with her in meditation every day. This woman is so stoic, which doesn't mean she's a robot. She doesn't feel. It doesn't mean that she doesn't bleed. She doesn't sweat. No, 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 she does. It's just the ability to carry a load that is heavy
Hmm.
with grace,
Yeah.
with and ultimately with confidence, right?
Yeah.
That no,
Yeah.
I got this. So I
Well, I think you're probably already there. You're already a badass. So know that you're already a version of your future self. But yeah, I
but the
think you're right. I think
master always has room to grow,
always has room to
right?
grow,
So
right?
it's
Yeah.
like I
And
never
and
want to
again,
catch her.
and really it's I think the most powerful people in terms of their ability to control are the ones who understand the power of emotions to the extent that they can use them to their advantage, because so in the best cases, right, joy and exuberance is very uplifting, and it creates DHEA in our system and rebuilds, right? So it's a rebuilding tool. So if you can deliberately implement joy and exuberance into your body, you'll grow, right? Anger and frustration is meant to get us moving. It's meant to get us frustration and agitation by design in our systems to get us to do something. When we're hungry, we get agitated to make us go find food, or when we're lonely and depressed, agitated to go find companionship. So focused, anger and frustration can actually get us moving
Yeah.
towards something positive. Same thing with sadness, and the kind of the more slightly morbid example would be, when you're in combat, you see stuff that's tough sometimes, and you don't oftentimes in the moment have time to mourn that.
Yeah.
So you have to compartmentalize and just finish the job. You have to complete the mission, which is exactly what has to happen. If you can't, however, later on
Hmm.
choose to deliberately mourn, right, and
Hmm.
let that out, it's going to build up, and we're going to get PTSD and things like that. And so the folks that I know, and luckily I was able to do this, that were able to see something and experience something, and then take time later to deliberately mourn it and exude those emotions, it was healthy. It's healthier that way.
So
So
powerful.
so that understanding of emotional power, I mean, their emotions are there for a reason, right? And so we
Hmm.
just have to understand when they come in, is it they can be fuel. They can be rocket fuel towards something, so we just have to understand how to use them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so powerful. No, I love that. I always, yeah, they're there for a reason. I always say, like, feel it, learn from it, ask questions, like, just discover more of yourself in the emotion. Just don't become it, right? You
Right.
can feel
Right.
frustrated, but don't become a frustrated human. Like
Right.
that's
Right.
not sexy.
Yeah. Don't live it. Don't live
Don't
it.
live it
Yeah.
exactly. Just because we touched on it, the dormant attributes. Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was
So
so.
dormant attributes are just those attributes that we have a preponderance of, but we don't know it. And the reason why we don't know it is we've never been put into a situation or experience that's drawn that out. And this, so that I think I describe in the book like the Scrooge effect, like Ebenezer Scrooge, who is the grumpy old miser after a night of haunting, is suddenly the empathetic, kind human being. Well, he didn't turn that way overnight. He was that way. It's just the experience allowed that to be brought out. Um, I would imagine if anybody wants to think about dormant attributes, think about any story in your life that can end with the phrase "I didn't know I had it in me," and it's
Mhm.
probably a story about a dormant attribute coming to the fore that you didn't know you had. But we do have dormant attributes. This is one of the reasons why you should seek the fight. This is one of your brilliant ideas. If you choose to seek the fight, you're choosing to put yourself into some discomfort, some uncertainty, and you're going to tease out attributes that you didn't know you might not know you had, and you learn something about yourself, which is cool.
So good. That's so powerful. Thank you. Um, Question: When you, out of all the attributes, I mean, I'm sure the entire process of writing the book was making you think, but what would you say? Could you point out one or two attributes that really had you thinking deeper about them, maybe in a way that you never had before?
Well, certainly, discipline. I had to do some thinking. I
That's
think I
right.
think the other big one, the one that we probably shouldn't leave unsaid, would be narcissism,
Yes.
um, because I was really trying to figure out why that made sense to me. And there are a couple things. First of all, I the definition of narcissism is the desire to stand out, be adored, be loved, be recognized, right? Um, and of course, there's narcissistic personality disorder, which is a very bad thing, and it's bad for everybody and should be avoided. But when you look at the DSM-5, which is the psychological kind of Bible, and you look at the explanation of narcissistic personality disorder, there are like 9 criteria. There's kind of beefed up sentences. If you
Mhm.
have 5 or more, you technically have the disorder. Okay, kind of rare. It's actually to have the full blown disorder is actually rare in the population. But I looked at those 9 things, and I said to myself, okay, well, I certainly don't have 5 or more, right? But there's elements of some of these sentences that resonate with me. I
Yeah.
said, um, and then I said to myself, okay, well, let me think about why I became a Navy SEAL in the first place. Okay, I was 22 years old, and I was a patriot. I wanted to, serve my country. But ultimately, if I were being honest with myself, I wanted to see if I could be a badass. I wanted to see if I could do something that very few people could do. And when I started talking to my buddies, they would admit the same thing. Yeah, I just, come on, it's kind of badass, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit of narcissism speaking. What we have to recognize is as human beings that every single human being at some point in their lives wants to stand out, be adored, be recognized. And this is biological. When we are getting paid attention to by our parents, for example, as an
Mhm.
infant, we are getting bursts of 2 neurotransmitters and 1 hormone, right? Dopamine, which we all know,
Mhm.
serotonin, which is kind of a neurotransmitter feeling of safety and connection and things like that, and then oxytocin, which is known as the love hormone. Okay, we're getting all 3 of those when we're getting paid attention to and adored as babies. Okay, that doesn't change when we're adults. Okay, it's
Right.
it's nice. It's nice to sometimes be adored and get paid attention, to feel special, to stand out,
Yeah.
to be unique. Okay, this what I realize is in some cases the impetus of audacious goals. This is the kid who wants to be the rock star. This is the kid who wants to be the Navy SEAL. This is the kid who wants to be the surgeon or the astronaut or the best salesperson. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter the goal. If it means something to you, you want it. Part of the reason why you make those audacious goals is narcissism. So the key is let's recognize our humanness. Let's recognize that narcissism exists. Let's use it effectively and metabolize it effectively. And then make sure we understand the caveat. It comes with a huge warning label, right? Because if it gets over, if you get too much, right?
Mhm.
The problem with it is it's invisible to see in ourselves. It's like a vampire staring in the mirror. Okay, it's
Mhm.
impossible to see in ourselves, which means the inoculation for that is to surround yourself with people who love you and know you and give you the honest candor with care that you need. They tell you when you're getting out over your skis. They tell you when your head's getting too big. This is your grounding wire. So my wife's been a grounding wire for me since we married, right? And my teammates were the same thing. But people who love you enough to keep you in check, you
Mhm.
can tell the narcissists by the people they surround themselves with. Narcissists, the full blown ones,
Right.
surround themselves with sycophants. They surround themselves with people who are always making them the center of attention.
Sure.
They get really they despise when they're not the center of attention. If someone leaves their group,
Mhm.
and it goes off, that person is now public enemy number one, right? Because that
Mm.
person is no longer giving them attention. So you can certainly, it's pretty easy to see narcissists, on
Yeah.
the outside. But in terms of ourselves, if we're careful, we just have to look at the people we're surrounding ourselves with. If we're surrounding ourselves with people who are yes men,
Exactly.
and it's kind of like, we're always the center, and everybody's kind of always in deference to it. We may have a problem.
Totally.
You want to. This is where good friends come from. It's like people who
Mhm.
you're not always the center of attention. You're not always the focus. That's healthiness. But certainly, a little bit of narcissism can actually be an incredible driver. So use it
Oh,
wisely.
so powerful. One thing that bores me is blanket statements. And I feel like straight up, I'm like
That's a
lazy
blanket
thinking.
statement, by the
Is
way.
it- Really? I never heard it. It's just like lazy thinking and blanket statements, and they really
Yeah,
go hand in hand. And you see, I mean, Instagram, it's like there's all this stuff on narcissism, and then you get to your book, and it's like, oh, well, actually, I mean, has anybody even thought of it this way? And you know what I wanted to talk to you about? I've never thought of it as narcissism, but and I haven't taken deep dives into conversations on the ego, but it's kind of it runs parallel. Well, I have thought of, the ego. I always say it like this, like, have a healthy relationship with your ego. If we didn't have ego, we wouldn't have gone to the moon or done
that's
incredible
right.
things.
That's right.
But now I'm thinking about it from that perspective of having a healthy, level of narcissism that is driving you to do
To do,
incredible things in life.
yeah, to
Yeah.
make those audacious goals. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So that's so great. Okay. Mindful of your time. A couple things I want to ask you. The attributes that you leaned into to write the book.
Yes.
Can you highlight a couple? Because I'm planning, just so you know, to write a couple of books in my life. So
Yeah,
I'm curious to what attributes you really leaned into hard, because I know it's a
yeah.
not an easy
Well,
task.
self efficacy certainly.
Hmm.
So you have to have the confidence to understand you could do it and get started. Open mindedness in terms of understanding where you think the book is supposed to go. It's probably going to change as you go. So that invokes adaptability as well, which is actually part of the fun of the process. Humility. You want to have other people read it and absorb it and tell you, hey, this is not making sense, and you're going to have to get rid of some of the things that you really love. You're like, well, no, that's great. No, it shouldn't be in here, right? So I think those are probably some starter attributes for any type of writing endeavor.
Okay, amazing. Noted. Another question. I when I was younger, my discipline, self-discipline, let me frame it to you like this. When I was a teenager, cleaning my room meant shoving all the shit in my closet and under the bed.
Mhm.
My environments now, they're mint because I need them to be, because I'm an artist and I like client, like, so like everything needs to be clean. When I cook, I leave the
Yeah,
kitchen and it's cleaner than when I went in there.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So thinking about that, I'm like, I've obviously developed these attributes that support that. Like, I would say it's self-discipline. I don't know if you would agree on that, but just thinking about your life and some of the attributes that you have developed, throughout your life that are really serving you. Can you point out a few of them that you had lower,
Yeah,
levels of at a younger age
yeah,
versus
yeah.
now?
The one that comes to mind immediately is empathy, and I was never unempathetic, right? I mean,
Hmm.
but I know that especially in, I guess, in my profession, I didn't have a lot of empathy. I wasn't concerned with it. It was really when I met my wife, who's one of the most empathetic people on the planet, who really started to teach me that there's value in every human being. You can learn something from everybody. And I just used to see how her natural curiosity used to just bring things out of people. I'm like, oh my God, I would have never known that. And so it helped me start to really more actively try to put myself in other people's shoes. So I think that's one that I've just developed over time more and more, and I continue to, because I think it's important, especially in
Yeah.
today's environment where we really have to try to be empathetic to as many people as we can.
Yeah, no, it's a powerful one. It's so important. I love that. Okay, let me ask you this question before we move into something that I like to do with all my guests to wrap out our conversation. Is there anything that you haven't mentioned in this conversation yet, or something that you maybe wish people would ask you more of, that you'd like to speak on more of, that you feel would be really great to insert into this conversation?
Gosh,
No,
it's been such a great conversation, to be
yeah.
honest with you. I don't think so. I mean, I love just going with the flow. So far so
Funny.
good. That's what I'll say.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, great.
yeah.
Okay, so one of my questions that I love to ask all my amazing guests, if you had a magic wand and you can give the masses one positive habit that would have a large ripple effect on their life, what would it be and why?
It would be the ability to ask better questions. And I talk about this all the time. Again, neurologically, we're designed to answer questions. If we deliberately place a question into our conscious mind, our brain begins to answer it, whether we like it or not. The
Mm,
problem is we do this unconsciously and the wrong way most of the time. We say, why am I so bad at this? Why does this always happen to me? Why are these people out to get me? Right. And I learned when I was kind of in high school that if I took charge of my questions and asked better ones, it would change my life, right? Which it did. I am a believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we consistently ask ourselves. And so take control of your questions and ask yourselves better ones. You can do that like now. I mean, that's something you could do right away, and you'll feel the difference.
I love that. Do you journal?
I should, but I'm the person who's like, hey, I should journal, and I don't. That's self-discipline. I don't have none. Right. But yeah, so instead but that's why writing the book was so good. I got a bunch of ideas out. It's like, okay, cool, 200
Yeah.
pages of ideas, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So,
What is the greatest thing you've learned about yourself? I just thought of this and I have to ask you. What's the greatest thing you learned about yourself in the process of writing your incredible book?
um, I learned that I get creative when I'm writing. Writing actually makes me more creative, which is fun. I actually get into flow states while I'm writing, and that's always fun. I have to have like pads of paper near where I'm typing, because if I have an idea pop in, I have to write it down so I don't lose it. So yeah, so the process of creating makes me more creative.
I love that. So then that bridges one other question. These are very just coming to me. What's next for you? Because I know I know you're someone
Yeah.
who's looking forward. Like, what's next for you?
Yeah, well, I am. I love to write another book. I have some ideas on another one. But right now we're building this attributes business, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
book's only 3 months old right now in terms of
Yeah.
release date. So building the speaking and consulting side of the business, hopefully get that to a place where, yeah, I'd love to do more in-depth assessments, that,
Mhm.
see how we can take those. So really build that out over the next year or two, and then see if and then see what comes down the pike. I'll be adaptable, and there's some uncertainty out there, which is cool. So
Yeah, I love
yeah,
that. So good. Okay, so I feel like this will humor you a bit. So the last part of my conversations, I do this thing called rapid fire words. You
okay,
do not need to be rapid in your response. It's whatever comes top of mind, top of heart. But what's funny is some of these words are going to really tell you, like, oh, she really did love the book. Okay, first word. Ready?
yes,
Love,
my wife,
fear,
conquer,
courage,
fear,
passion,
um, life,
mm, curiosity.
everything.
um, sorry, what was it? No, where did I go? I just short circuited. Challenge.
Good.
I feel like we're on like Jeopardy right
Yeah. What is good? Sorry.
It's amazing. Or Family Feud. I'm from the 80s, obviously. Um, two more words. One of my favorites, resilience.
Anti-fragility.
I love it. Final word, excellence.
Excellence. Well-being.
I love it. I love you passed.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah. Excellent.
I Oh my gosh, I am so grateful for every minute of this conversation, for you taking on the arduous task of writing your incredible book. I cannot say it enough. I love your book. It is something that I will continuously be using in my coaching practice, gifting to the world. And I want to encourage everybody to go get your book, The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers to Optimal Performance. Did I remember it perfectly? Just a fun little side note. So I get a lot of my books on Kindle first. And a lot of times too, because I'll be reading books that maybe I'm going to be podcasting with a guest, which I didn't know until with you in your case, until I was halfway through the book. And then I asked you to podcast. So what I do with my books on Kindle is I can highlight things and make them flashcards. Your entire fucking book is a flashcard. Because then it's like retention, and things I want to remember. And then if I have a lot of flashcards, then I buy the physical book because it sits in my library of life. Right. So your book is in the library of life. Thank you so much, Rich. I hope to have more conversations, and I'm here in full support of all of your work and everything that's coming from you. So thank you for being such a powerful contributor and all the work serving before all of it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. Thanks for being such a great supporter. Thanks for what you do. And let's definitely keep in touch. So
absolutely. And everybody to stay in touch with you, Instagram or best, the
attributes.com on the attributes.com on the web. You can go there, you can get the book, you can do the assessment, you can hit me from there on Instagram and LinkedIn and the Facebook page, everything all there. So take a visit and be great.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Talk to you again.
Okay.
Take care. Okay. Bye. Bye.